my outline of the presentation. First of all, I will be talking about the introduction part, and then I will go what is my objective of this very presentation, and then I will talk about what is the DOS disease and what is the core DOS disease model, and after that the conceptual framework of the DOS disease model, and the second last will be methodology and analysis, and I will end up my presentation with the conclusion. About Nepal, it's a South Asian country surrounded by India and China, between the two large economies, and it has an area of 147,181 kilometers square, and it has population of 27 million, and this is the just brief introduction of my country. Let me show you about some big facts and figure about my country. This is the economic growth. Last 2 decades, the economic growth is revolving around 5% or 4%, and this is not so much promising. And here, the many people are going abroad for foreign employment. They are seeking job internationally, and they are sending back their money to the country. So we have a very upward trend of remittance and foreign employment. And this is the pattern of trade deficit and remittance. So from the very beginning of 2000, the remittance income has increased so much, and from the same time also the trade deficit also increased. It was like the remittance was like around 3% some 10 years ago, but now it has reached to 25% of GDP. That's so significant. And broadly dividing our economy into 3 main sectors: agriculture sector, and industry sector, and service sector. The agriculture sector is declining from the very beginning. We have declining share of agriculture in GDP. However, the industry sector, the share of industry sector increased up to 2000 and it started to decline. And the service sector is increasing and even increased more after 2000. So we have a strong relationship. We see there is some kind of relationship between the remittance shock and these kind of effects on the economy. Okay, now, given the facts and figures, this study has the objective of exploring the current macroeconomic scenarios of Nepal in the context of DOS disease phenomena. So now I will be talking about what is actually DOS disease is. So DOS disease is first coined in 1977 to refer the Netherlands manufacturing sector collapse, which initiated after the huge natural gas resource found in 1959. It is also regarded as resource boom or resource curse. So what is the core DOS disease model? What it tells us? So the first core DOS disease model was developed by Gordon and Neri in 1982, and they identified 3 sectors. The booming sector, of course, the oil or mineral sector, and the lagging sector is manufacturing and industry sector, and non-tradable sector. They segregated the whole economy into 3 parts. And the booming and non-tradable sector expands. Their finding was, in the core DOS disease model, booming and non-tradable sector expands, and lagging sector, the manufacturing or industry sector, will contract. And this is because of 2-channel effect. That's because of the resource movement between these sectors and spending effect. So on the basis of this core DOS disease model, I'm going to explain about my country. So So the concept of Dutch disease model is, okay. So here, there is a booming sector, but we don't have such kind of booming sector. Rather than I put remittance in the booming sector. Because a lot of money, almost 25% of the GDP money is coming from the remittance sector. So now I substitute the remittance as a booming sector and want to see what will be the impact of that impact on the tradable sector, that means manufacturing and industry sector, agriculture sector, and non-tradable sector, that means the service sector. Here, my conceptual framework of the study is like this. I divided the transmission channel of the effect as two. The first one is international channel. That means when remittance increases, the money coming from the outside increases, the domestic currency demand increases. That will appreciate the currency, the Nepalese currency. And if the currency appreciates, the export will be more expensive and import will be more cheaper. That will lead to the more import and less export. So the import is with the tradable goods. So tradable sector contracts because imported goods are substituting the tradable sector. At the same time, non-tradable sector cannot be imported. So there will be tradable sector contracts. That will be the international mechanism of the tradable sector contraction. But for the very analysis of Nepalese economy, we don't have to consider that because our currency is strongly pegged with Indian currency, and our currency fluctuation is almost entirely explained by the fluctuation in Indian currency. So we, for the easiness of our study, we mute this channel because our currency is strongly pegged with Indian currency. Let me go to the domestic channel. What happens when remittance increase? First, remittance increase means disposable income increase. That increase the demand for consumption. So total consumption increase in both tradable and non-tradable sector equally. And there will be labor supply decrease because income effect will be dominant. So people tend to work less because they have a lot of money to spend. So there will be higher demand and less supply, which means there will be pressure of inflationary pressure. So there are two sectors, and both the sectors are facing the inflationary pressure. But law of one price holds true in tradable sector. That means the price should be consistent with the international prices. So the tradable sector's price cannot be changed because if that would be expensive, people will import more and more goods from the international market because that's cheaper. But non-tradable sector, which cannot be imported, the demand is still high, so price will increase of the non-tradable sector. In that case, the relative price of non-tradable sector increase. So it's more profitable to produce more non-tradable goods. So demand for resources increase. Here, I choose labor as main resource for producing the non-tradable goods. So because of the higher relative price of the non-tradable goods, the wage of non-tradable goods increase, and people moves from the tradable sector to non-tradable sector because the non-tradable sector has higher wage, and that will also induce the increase in tradable sector wage and the overall wage increase, and finally the non-tradable sector expands and tradable sector contracts. This is the conceptual model of my study. So how I gonna study about this kind of thing, the Dutch disease, whether my economy is infected by Dutch disease or not because of the huge remittance inflow? I'm going to use broadly two kind of models. First, I'm going to use dynamic stochastic general equilibrium. This is a model. And in this one, I'm using stochastic process, remittance as a stochastic process, and remittance as a deterministic trend. I will talk about what is stochastic process and what is deterministic trend later on. And the second model is recursive vector and autoregressive. That uses the time series. I will talk what is the recursive vector autoregressive later on. Okay, let's go to the DHT model. Now, for the simplicity, I use 3 sectors only for the DHT model. First is households. Households consumes, I assume household consumes tradable and non-tradable goods. So tradable and non-tradable goods comes from the tradable firms and non-tradable firms. So in this model, first remittance is injected in the households. So households will react in some way, like changing the pattern of labor and demanding more goods. And that good would be supplied by the tradable firms and non-tradable firms. And some kind of resource movement mechanism will happen, as I've already mentioned it, that the labor will move from the tradable sector to non-tradable sector. That kind of thing happens. And the detail of this model is available in Appendix 1, which I have included here. You can have a look later on. If I have time, I will show you. So I define remittance as a stochastic process means people don't know. The shock happens suddenly. So this is the equation which gives the responses of the remittance. And this is the phi Rm is the parameter, how long the shock persists in the economy. And the shock follows the normal distribution with mean 0 and the standard deviation, some standard deviation. Okay. After this, I'm making the model, I use the nonlinear equations, and nonlinear equations is difficult to solve, so I change it somehow to the linear model by taking by choosing log linearization. Some kind of thing I have already done. You can have a look at the appendix if you are interested. Let's go to the result. And this is the result I got when I gave a shock. So I gave a shock, a positive unit shock to the remittance, and I would like to focus these main 4 figures. Here you can clearly see the tradable sector's labor goes down when there is a positive remittance, and the non-tradable sector labor will increase. At the same time, in the beginning, the tradable sector contracts, but when the economy, when the remittance effect in the economy dies out, the non-tradable sector also expands, but at the beginning, the effect will be negative. Yeah, which is consistent with the Dawes-Disease model. And also the non-tradable sector expands. Here, we see the expansion of the non-tradable sector. Here, let's see, this effect dies out within the 5th period, but we have the effect more than 15 period. More than 15 period or almost 20 period sometime. So with this figure, I got the conclusion, I got the findings that effects of remittance remains in the economy for a long time, even the shock remains for the short period. So remittance shock is remaining for 5 periods, but most of the macroeconomic variables has effect more than 5 years. And there is a clear spending effect. So consumption of tradable and non-tradable both increases. And clear resource movement effect, level of non-tradable increase, level of tradable decrease, real wage increase, relative price increase, real interest rate decrease, investment increase, capital increase. The final result is tradable output contracts with the remittance shock, and non-tradable sector expands. Okay, let's see, instead of stochastic process, the remittance follows expected pattern. The remittance will increase in the future and eventually goes to the original level. That's the expectation of the people. Then what will happen to the impulse responses? Let's see. This is the simulation of the model, and here the remittance has this kind of pattern, and people know in advance that kind of thing going to happen in the economy. So here the tradable sector expansion and non-tradable sector expansion and tradable sector contraction is very clear here. So when we choose deterministic process for the remittance, the Dutch disease effect is even magnified. So if people know in advance there will be increase in the remittance, the Dutch disease effect will be more intense. But contrary to the stochastic model, we find two different things. Both investment and capital decline in deterministic model in the beginning. That's my finding. Okay, this is the model, DSC model. Now let's go into the vector autoregressive, which uses the time series and which will give us the proof of existence of Dutch disease empirically. And I choose as this order. Remittance affects the price level, which is represented by CPI. If CPI gonna be higher, that means if there is inflation, more import will be happen, so that affects trade deficit. If trade deficit increases, that means the contraction of the tradable goods, and eventually the contraction of the tradable goods means the expansion of the non-tradable goods. That kind of thing I conceptualize and I express it as a recursive bar model. And this is the detail of that one is included in appendix 2. You can have a look at that. And this is the response. Here with the remittance, positive remittance of the price level increases, and there will be positive increase in trade deficit. Trade deficit will increase, and in the beginning, there will be contraction of the tradable sector and expansion of the non-tradable sector, which is consistent with the core Dutch disease model. So we can say that the economy has Dutch disease effect. So the finding of the recursive vector analysis impulse responses are consistent with the DSG impulse responses and suggest the empirical evidence of Dutch disease in Nepalese economy. Let's conclude our analysis study with some key points. These are some key points. The results are robust and consistent with the Dutch disease effect phenomenon. Rise in the remittance inflow is one of the culprits for the increasing trade deficit and the trade and non-tradable sector imbalance. And the final conclusion is that even short-term remittance shock could lead to a longer-term impact in the economy. Let me end my presentation here. Thank you for your kind attention, and the floor is now open for question and answer. If you have any question, I would be very happy to answer that. Thank you.
Timekeeping, I guess. Questions, comments, clarification, questions? Anything? For my seminar, questions? So the remittance plays a pretty much important role in the Nepalese economy, okay? And which means that it contributes to the Nepalese economy income-wise, right? But that means that all those basically labor resources sent out to the other country, and the only productive sector in Nepalese economy would rather concentrate on non-tradable goods, and tradable goods sector contracts, and instead of that, tradable goods are imported from the outside of the Nepalese country to the Nepalese country. Okay, that's the problem. And it seems like you're trying to see how much of change in the how much of change in the remittance will affect Nepalese economy's tradable sector, non-tradable sectors. And it seems like the initial temporary effect, temporary increase in the remittance revenue by the Nepalese country can have prolonged effect on the non-tradable sector, and both non-tradable sector and tradable sectors will continue to squeeze out tradable sector for a while after the shock that was introduced by the increase in the remittance. Okay? That's basically the problem. And he checked it with dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model, which is a model-based summary. And he also checked it with whether such a kind of technique can be identified within the vector autoregressive model, which is an empirical-based, empirical statistical-based statistical model, I think, which is often said to have much better prediction power rather than the DSGE, and it's still has also similar effects comparable to DSGE. Okay? That's I think he has the exercise he has done. Okay. Any questions? I think for most of those developing countries who has only small, initially has small, relatively have a weak comparative advantage in the industrial sector. Has a similar problem. Faced with the opportunity to trade with other countries, because they don't, those countries has not much comparative advantage in exportable trade sectors. They can resort to trade in labor force. Okay? The comparative advantage in these countries are laborers. They offer low wages. So instead of producing goods with that cheap labor, they just export the cheap labor itself to the outside of the country. It's a factor trade, and they get the revenue out of it. But that means that the trade sector, tradable industrial sector in Nepal would not prosper. That's the problem. And his question is, does that effect prolong? And how much of that effect would be on the economy?
Some points I would like to make it here. You may wonder why there is sudden rise in the remittance pattern in the country. As you can see here, from 2000 it's rapidly increased. Why? Because our country had an experience of conflict, internal conflict. There was some kind of internal insurgency for the 10 years, and that started somewhere around this period. So people were like pessimistic about the country's situation, and they didn't find any opportunity to use their labor. Then they started to go out for the working and sustaining their lives. So that pattern has increased a lot with 2000, and that continued to increase. Still today, many people are going outside for the employment. You can see here the pattern. Yeah. So the political situation is still, there is no insurgency right now, but still the political situation is not so promising, not so stable. So people are still going outside. So people are expecting, oh, there will be remittance income even more in the future. So I included this expectation that it will continue for some time, and after that there will be political instability with the economic growth. Then they don't have to go outside and they can come back and work in the country. So in that scenario, what will happen? Yeah, that I kind of thing I'm studying here. That's the motivation of my study, why I'm interested in the remittance and the dust disease. And I want to see whether industry sector or manufacturing sector is the competitive sector of any country. So whether that is winning our competitive power of our country or not, I want to see that. So that's the key thing that I want to analyze with this study.
I have a question. It's quite broad, but how much do you think globalization has a role in the development of Nepalese? You said people are moving around, but and you said that hopefully they will come back to the remittance. But because globalization, obviously there'll be different people moving around, so do you think that has a big impact in the future?
Yeah, if you look at the history, many Nepalese people were going outside, particularly in India for work, like seasonal. They don't have anything to cultivate, or most of the Nepalese people are farmers, and they don't have to do anything in the winter season. So there was a pattern, people going for in India in the winter season and coming back. But after the insurgency, that pattern increased. Yeah, globalization certainly like pushed that pattern. Yeah, but rather than developing the country, somehow it sustained the country. Rather than developing the country, I think that is creating some kind of imbalance. Yeah, in some sense that supported the country. Even there was no economic activity that send the income inside the country and that make the people to purchase or consume things, maximizing their utility. But at the same time, yeah, that they had some negative impact. Globalization has negative impact. Yeah. So I think globalization also has both effect, positive effect and negative effect. Particularly, I am interested in hearing the negative effect. What could be the negative effects in the economy? Thank you.
I just wanted a clarification on the difference between the tradable goods and the non-tradable goods. Because in the beginning you talked about how the agricultural sector and the industry sector is decreasing, but the service sector is increasing. So are you saying that the tradable sector is the agriculture and the industry sector, or is it just the industry sector?
Okay. First thing, the tradable and non-tradable sector is anything that can be imported is tradable sector. Anything that can be exported and imported, not only goods. If you export services, that's also the tradable goods. And anything that cannot be imported, that has to be produced within the country, that's the non-tradable sector. For this particular figure, I'm showing these three kind of things because there is a decreasing pattern from the very beginning in agriculture sector. Yeah. By indicating the tradable sector, I'm merging in the agriculture sector and industry sector. But for this very particular scenario presenting, I segregated it as agriculture sector and industry sector. But for my analysis, I merged it. That means tradable sector means agriculture sector plus industry sector, and the non-tradable sector means service sector. Is it clear?
Yeah. And when you said the term the Dutch disease,
Yes.
refers to the Netherlands manufacturing sector class.
Yes,
So
yes.
does this also include the agricultural sector for the Dutch as well?
Actually, they were pretty much interested in the manufacturing sector of the industry. At that time, they had a huge resource finding in the country and they were exporting a lot outside the country. And that created a huge demand of the Dutch guilder, that is the currency of the Netherlands. And import became more cheaper and export became more expensive. Then they found the manufacturing sector is shrinking. And they are losing their competitive advantage. Even they had a huge resources to mobilize. And they were interested in why that kind of thing is happening in the economy. And by the research, they coined the term Dutch disease. So it's Basically, the motive is if there is a huge resource inflow in the country at a time, so what will happen to the balance of the industry sector or manufacturing sector and service sector, that kind of thing they are analyzing. Yeah, they didn't include agriculture sector, but I have included here agriculture sector. Thank you.
The problem is this: when Dutch country experiences huge increase in endowment of resources, comparative advantage of Dutch country shifts toward resources. Okay? So they lose comparative advantage in the industrial sector. In a sense, they only export resources and they import industrial sector programs. And they, as a result, industrial sector shrinks. That's what the problem in the Dutch case. In this Nepalese case, the only comparative advantage they have is human labor resources. If labor resources are tradable, then they just export labor instead of exporting industry by using those local labor. Okay? That was the problem. So, I think not only Nepalese but also maybe Philippines, similar experience similar thing. The problem seems to be they have comparative advantage in labor supply because they're very close to India, because they share similar culture. It's easy to go to India and work, right? So it is exportable, and they have a comparative advantage in exporting the labor force. For the case of the Philippines, they speak good English, right? And they have good educational background, good enough educational background. They can, so nurses, entertainment industries, they have very good comparative advantage in providing those services. So we import those labor forces. Instead, they can't use those labor forces within the country and export it. Okay? So those are the problems they're facing, I guess. And these kinds of problems can be seen almost everywhere in a global situation, or even within the country. In the case of global situation, Mongolia is also experiencing a very similar situation. They only export copper, and over the last 5 or 6 years, copper price tripled. And at the same time, their import tripled. All the revenue they have gotten from the copper was spent on the consumption goods, which is produced in China. Okay, so they don't produce their consumption goods in Mongolia. Yeah.
I would like to comment. Sensei really said, I agree to Sensei that his comment is, our situation is similar. Like we also have increasing remittances because we have increasing migrant workers as well. And also I would like to ask, because in our case, during the latest financial crisis, the U.S. Financial crisis, like the bankruptcy, I think, of Lehman Brothers, like that. Remittances have helped the Philippines to be resilient during that time, and because the circulation of the currency is still okay. So I would like to ask if that is true as well with Nepal during that time, during the 2007 or 2008 financial crisis.
So at that, the Nepalese economy the Nepalese economists was predicting like most of the labor were going to the India and the Gulf countries. So the crisis, they expect the Indian is tied up with the global economy. Our country is not tied up with the global economy, but tied up with the India. So we are expecting some kind of flow of effect, but we didn't have such a serious effect in Nepalese economy. We didn't have that much effect, but somehow, yeah, it affected. At that time, somehow the remittance decreased. People, they were not hiring as much as labor as before, so that kind of thing happened, but not affected much to the Nepalese economy.
Okay, I think time is up, so let's move on to the next presentation. Thank you for your good presentation.